With his iconic look and flashy personality, along with being one of the most famous people involved in one of the most important events of the 20th century, it is no surprise General Douglas MacArthur has been portrayed in films since the year World War II ended. From being a featured character or played as the star of a high-budget production, small and big names in Hollywood have put on the Ray-Bans to play the often controversial general. Today we're going to go through some of the films featuring Douglas MacArthur and how he is portrayed. Two of the earliest iterations of MacArthur put to film were played by the same man, character actor Robert Barrett. Barrett played MacArthur in John Ford's They Were Expendable and Fritz Lang's Guerrilla in the Philippines. In both films, the Philippines during World War II is the main subject of the film. Also in both films, MacArthur is mostly a background character with the main plot concerning the plight of fictional characters. They Were Expendable came out in December of 1945, mere months after the war ended. Starring John Wayne, Robert Montgomery, and Donna Reed, this film depicts a motor torpedo boat squadron that defends the Philippines during the Japanese invasion and subsequent evacuation of General MacArthur. The events and characters are not real, but Montgomery's character is based off actual PT boat skipper who got the MacArthurs to Australia while escaping Corregidor in 1942. While the opening sequence is a shot of MacArthur's speech aboard the USS Missouri, the only scene with MacArthur is of him dramatically boarding the escape boat towards the end of the film. MacArthur was one of the most famous people in the world when the film was made. However, controversy over him leaving the Philippines still surrounded the general, especially amongst service members of the war. John Wayne later said, "There are a number of top Navy brass at the location, and there are quite a few disparaging remarks like, 'This is where the old ran out,' and that sort of thing. But by God, when the scene started and the guy who was playing MacArthur walked out, you could see the look in their eyes change." Despite controversy surrounding MacArthur, even an actor's approximation of him commanded the officer's respect. Guerrilla in the Philippines came out in 1950, right before the outbreak of the Korean War. It is the story of an American junior officer played by Tyrone Powers as a remaining crew member of General MacArthur's escort to Australia, who stranded on the Philippines throughout the Japanese occupation, evading capture and going behind enemy lines to help the Allies. Powers' character is based off Lieutenant Ilip Richardson. Richardson told the story about his time in the Philippines to Ira Wolford, who wrote the book that the film was based on. As mentioned earlier, MacArthur was depicted by the same actor in this film as in They Were Expendable. MacArthur is referenced extensively throughout the film.
General MacArthur.
MacArthur and
General MacArthur.
MacArthur.
General MacArthur.
MacArthur's?
He said he'd return, didn't he?
His promise to return to liberate the Philippines is a major driving force of the plot and character motivations. At the end of the film, when the American forces return to take the Philippines, the characters of the film greatly anticipate his appearance after 3 years.
Sailor, for 3 years we've waited for him. Let him come to us.
The only shot of MacArthur is the final scene where a parade shows MacArthur waving to a crowd from a jeep going down the street and the main character saluting the general. In both of these films, the stars and people involved in production were almost exclusively veterans of the war. While they are historically inaccurate, they are made to dramatize events of the war with a heavy doses of patriotism. MacArthur's role as a background presence revered by the characters in the film shows the power of his authority in the years between the end of World War II and the Korean War. MacArthur as the transcendent icon of the war in the Pacific was most prominent in these years. Later films would focus less on the iconic nature of his figure, but have a greater focus on MacArthur the person and his decisions as a general. MacArthur depicted as a character on screen did not happen again until 1976 with the release of Collision Course, Truman vs. MacArthur. This made-for-TV movie starred Henry Fonda as MacArthur and E.G. Marshall as Truman, depicting the confrontation during the Korean War that ended with MacArthur's eventual removal. The film shows their infamous meeting at Wake Island, the only time the two met in real life. They are shown as having a private, off-the-record meeting, but in reality there were others present and unofficial transcripts from both sides. In 1977, Gregory Peck played the general in the simply titled MacArthur. Told in flashback during MacArthur's visit to West Point in 1962, this film recounts MacArthur's life from 1942 at the start of World War II to 1952 after his removal during the Korean War. This film depicts iconic moments of MacArthur's life, such as his duty honor country speech, laying ashore at Leyte, his I have returned speech, and him signing the surrender aboard the USS Missouri, as well as the unphotographed moments, like MacArthur finding out he was fired during a dinner. As opposed to other movies about MacArthur that show snapshots of events in MacArthur's life, MacArthur has a 10-year timeline showing his life, bookended by his legendary speech. Peck portrays MacArthur as a thoughtful and stoic man.
Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon all failed as occupiers of conquered countries because of the harshness of their policies.
This film is generally an agreeable look at the general's life from World War II to Korea, with a little look into the darker sides of his personality, besides poking fun at his better-known negative traits.
Everyone's about to see that I can't walk on water.
In a post-Watergate world where war movies had moved away from the traditional narrative of John Wayne patriotism and TV shows like MASH treating MacArthur as a joke,
and you can splash in and give us a speech.
this portrayal attempts a more serious and realistic look at MacArthur's life during these turbulent years. The next major MacArthur production was 1981's Inchon, which made a point to give advance warning of its intentions to dramatize the subject. Sir Laurence Olivier stars in this production, considered one of the worst movies of all time. Focusing on the Battle of Inchon, there are also multiple subplots focusing on fictional drama between fictional characters with the war in the background. You would think that the king of Shakespeare, Laurence Olivier, might have been a good choice to play the sometimes flamboyant general, but Olivier's MacArthur performance ended up winning the Razzie Award for Worst Actor in 1982.
You must act now!
Both Peck and Olivier came to the MacArthur Memorial to research their role as the general in the film. Our archives contain pictures of Peck during his visit, touring the memorial and its archives. The Emperor explores after the war and MacArthur's job during the occupation, including his decision to keep Emperor Hirohito on his throne. The film follows real-life Brigadier General Bonner Felder's investigation of Emperor Hirohito to determine if he should have been tried as a war criminal. The film deals with MacArthur's belief and decision that keeping the emperor as head of state would aid in the occupation, showing that neither the emperor or the people of Japan were being punished. The main focus of the film is to show that the cultural differences between Japan and the US should not be something divisive, but something to harmonize the two countries, something that MacArthur did achieve as Supreme Allied Commander. While Tommy Lee Jones as MacArthur is top billed, Matthew Fox as Felders has more screen time, and the focus is on his investigation. Jones plays MacArthur as a confident, larger-than-life, clever character with hints of insubordination that we know would be the eventual downfall of the real-life general.
You didn't bring me the proof, bring me the emperor.
Finally, the 2016 South Korean film Operation CHROMITE can best be described as the Korean War being turned into an action movie. Famed action star Liam Neeson even plays MacArthur. Neeson's MacArthur has to come up with a plan for South Korean forces to go behind enemy lines to help him plan the Incheon invasion. The team, disguised as North Korean insurgents, infiltrates the North Korean army to gather information. Meanwhile, MacArthur is trying to convince his superiors that his plan will work. While inspired by the real Operation Trudy Jackson, Operation CHROMITE takes many liberties to downright inaccurate portrayals of what really happened as MacArthur tried to execute his plan to invade Incheon. While the majority of the film is an action romp, Neeson's portrayal of MacArthur is that of a hard-earned wisdom with lengthy speeches that reflect the attitude of the real MacArthur.
This war will not end by politicians simply drawing some line on a map. I won't agree to that.
While being portrayed in film for over 75 years, it's hard to say if there is a definitive portrayal of General MacArthur. What is your favorite performance? Let us know. For more information about the real story behind MacArthur and the events of Korea in World War II, check out our other videos.